Well, welcome everybody to another Montessori Lives, conversations with notable Montessorians. And today we have with us Max Bergh, and you are CEO of Amiga Montessori. Um, Tell us a bit about your Montessori story. How did you get started?
So I'm Max. I'm the CEO of Amiga. We've got 17 childcare centers that run a Montessori pedagogy. I actually didn't discover Montessori myself. It sort of discovered me through my family. My mother was a childcare teacher. Well, she was actually a school teacher in South Africa. And then when she fell pregnant with my brother, she wanted to keep herself busy. So her best friend at the time suggested that she enroll in this thing called a Montessori diploma. And she had absolutely no idea what Montessori was, but when she was doing the course, she absolutely fell in love with the pedagogy, its structure and its deep intentionality. And the respect that it holds for the child. So I still have photos of myself as a toddler acting as her little assistant in all her assignments in her diploma. Um, we then later immigrated to Australia, and she noticed in Victoria there weren't really many school centres offering Montessori pedagogy. So she was like, I'm going to do one myself, which is how we started. And then over the past 20 years, she's really imbued us with her love for Montessori, and I've really lived and breathed her passion for Montessori, which has shaped my views and values and the leadership that I want to bring to Amiga. So I get to carry forward her love for Montessori as some of my own legacy with the same sort of devotion that she has to it.
Were you a teacher yourself? And for if
I wasn't, no. My background's actually in law, but I fulfilled every roles in the center from, being the person that pulls the toilet roll out of the, the toilets when the children are getting it in there, through to working in the classrooms, through to being a center manager. So whilst that's not my formal background and training, I have been in the classrooms for a very, very long time.
you kind of threw that in there as a kind of offhand comment. Oh, I got into law. So can you talk a bit about that? How did you get into law, and what led you back to Montessori after law?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't think I ever left Montessori. I sort of always managed the two simultaneously. I was never in a sort of big management position when my mother was running it. I got a Bachelor of Arts and a Juris Doctor from Melbourne University. And then I worked in commercial law for a while. And then my grandmother, she actually got really sick. So my mom made the decision that she would step back from the CEO role, and we're very passionate about this being a family-owned and family-run business. So she said, "Well, do you want to take over?" She sort of said, "No one loves Montessori the way I love Montessori, but because you're pretty much me, you love Montessori just as much as I do. So you'd be the best person to take over," which is why I ended up taking it over.
But what have you most loved about being in Montessori education?
It's a very hard question. I love the deep respect that it has for the child, and I think that's something that's really misunderstood. The fact that it doesn't teach you to rote learn something, or that it doesn't provide any, it provides formal frameworks for you to build, well, you as a child, for the child to build up that confidence and that desire to learn. I think that's probably, in essence, something that I really love about Montessori is it doesn't necessarily, it's akin to law in a way, in that it doesn't necessarily teach you what to think. It teaches you how to think. And it doesn't tell you, here's some interesting things you can learn. It says, look how interesting learning is. And it builds that natural curiosity to continue exploring, because, we have children until they're about 6. But hopefully when they leave us, they have a desire for learning that they take with them for the rest of their life. And that's what I really love about Montessori.
Mm. So being around Montessori for so long, are there things that have irritated you about Montessori? What have you least loved about being a Montessori educator?
Yeah. I think the thing that I love least and that I found most disheartening is the stigma that we have from some members of the regulatory community. I do think this remains really persistent, and I think it's a little bit outdated. And it's this perception that Montessori is rigid and it's not genuinely child-led, particularly when you sort of compare it to play-based models. So um, we've had representatives from the department say things like, I just can't get my head around Montessori, or I just don't like Montessori. Um, and I mean, we recently received a breach for one of our services because the underlying narrative appeared to be like a mistrust or a dislike of Montessori. So, for example, one of the things that was raised with us was like, you should let them inside and outside at all times. They should have indoor, outdoor access. And we sort of feel, well, we can't protect the sort of core tenets of Montessori if we just have this flow inside and outside. The structure isn't arbitrary. It's there to protect integral, uninterrupted work cycles. So I think that has been a difficulty for us, is that, regulatory authorities don't necessarily understand the reasons why we do things. Another example is we got told that we didn't respond to children's needs or interests because we hadn't provided immediately EYLF construction materials. And when we sort of said, but here's the pink tower and here's the broad stair, both of which are foundational construction materials in a Montessori environment, we were told, well, you need to have EYLF construction resources. So I think that sometimes those structures that we have and some of the Montessori resources aren't necessarily understood by the regulators in the way that they should be. In saying that, I definitely want to acknowledge that we've worked with some amazing authorized officers who've really engaged thoughtfully, and they've asked meaningful questions, and they have a genuine willingness to learn. But I do think that there is still a sort of subgroup who are a little bit anti-Montessori, and that's definitely been something challenging that we've had to work with.
So in your journey, what are some of the big moments along the way when you knew you were on the right path?
I actually think it's very interesting. The moment I knew I was on the right path is when I got off another path. So there was a time really early on in my tenure where I allowed my inexperience to overshadow my kind of core conviction. So I did momentarily waver in the approach that we were taking with Montessori. I had a very senior person who had been an authorized officer before really say, you have to try this indoor outdoor model, which I then tried. And the center then got an exceeding rating in 6 of the 7 areas. But when I visited that center, I sort of saw that we had compromised the authenticity of the Montessori program. They had lost their calm. Children were sort of drifting between spaces. They weren't as engaged in that purposeful learning. And I think that moment I just sort of made a decision that if we were only ever going to get meeting ratings moving forward, but I could say that we were getting those meeting ratings with full integrity to the Montessori principles, that really genuinely prepared children for school, that was something I could stand behind. I could say, well, fine, we'll never get an exceeding again, but I know what we're offering the children is of an exceeding standard, and I'm happy to just get meeting moving forward. So from that experience, my poor educators, they were not happy with me. We retrained every educator. We reestablished really rigorous routines. We had sort of financial incentives for both the teachers and managers. We did continuous audits. So we put a lot of effort back into getting it back to being a Montessori center. But that transformation was profound. If I go to that center now, it's calm, it's orderly, it's deeply intentional. The children are so engaged. And I think what's really telling is that even though we may never get an exceeding there again, it's full. It's totally full. And there's families on the waiting list. The parents really advocate for us. The schools around advocate for us. So I think that moment really marked a turning point in my leadership, because it was like, well, I'm not going to get stressed out and distracted by, these ratings and what, you know, other people want us to do, I know that Montessori can really offer the best to children, and that's what we're going to do, even if it means we never, you know, get this sort of gold standard exceeding again.
Yeah, you've started to talk about one of the things I wanted to bring up, which is that doing quality Montessori is challenging because there are a lot of obstacles in the way, more obstacles than in other methods, I would imagine.
Mm.
What are some of the other obstacles? You've noticed you mentioned the regulatory obstacle, but what are some of the other notable obstacles that you've encountered in building Amiga?
Mm. I mean, obviously there's building Amiga from the business perspective, which has been a real challenge, and I absolutely take my hat off to my mother. She came here with $50, and she's managed to build such an amazing business. Obviously, from the Montessori perspective, I think the other really massive challenge is there's training of staff. It's been one of the most enduring and complex challenges to find educators who can deliver that authentic Montessori education, because it's fine for me to want that, but I need people on the floor who have enough training to be able to actually deliver that. Um, Obviously here, the Montessori diploma that you can do overseas is not necessarily recognized as a standalone qualification that you can then go and work in a childcare center. So I think that dissuades people from undertaking a Montessori sort of specific training, or it dissuades people from coming if they've got multiple choices and they've got a Montessori diploma and they come here and they have to retrain, or they can go somewhere else where it's recognized, they're going to go there. So I think we're not exactly in the best position where people want to do Montessori training here. Over the years at Amiga, we've explored numerous approaches to try and solve this problem. So for example, we began by doing weekend training. So we would fully fund overtime for people to do training with our head of pedagogy. They would do 11 sessions of 2 to 3 hour blocks. And then they would cover off everything from NIDO all the way to cycle 1. But obviously, when you think about, that's a significant amount of hours at overtime for 600 people. But also we found inconsistency. So people would say, well, I've got children's sport, or it's my weekend, so I can't come. So we then trialed it in the evenings after work, and we sort of had a similar problem where people were like, the people who could come on Saturdays now couldn't come on the evenings. So I think that getting people off the floor and then finding a suitable time to train them is really challenging. Because obviously we're in a industry that has quite, and still enduringly has, workforce shortages, and lots of jobs out there for people. So I think, you know, when you get someone, you put them in the role and you try and train them as best you can. There isn't as much flexibility to just take them off the floor and train them like there are. And if I was in law, I could just say, you can go and do this training now. Whereas you can't necessarily do that with people who are in ratio. So finding that time. We looked offshore. So we thought, okay, we'll find people with Montessori qualifications and then we'll sponsor them and we'll bring them over here. But there are sort of limitations on that sponsorship route about who you can and can't and which roles you can sponsor. So that was a slight problem for us as well. But our most recent solution has been more of a long-term scalable solution. So we thought, well, if we can't get you off the floor, we're going to give you the trainer in the room with you, which had been really hard in the past because we've got 2 core head of pedagogies, and to get them on the floor at that moment where teacher has time is impossible. So we kind of decided we would go down a technology route. So we filmed every single Montessori presentation for NIDOs and Cycle 1. And then we built this library of 200 videos in English, and then over 1,000 videos translated into the core languages that our teachers speak. And then that's now on all of their planning devices, all of the iPads in the room. They've got access to it on their personal devices. So when that moment of spare time presents itself, they have access to that training material at all times and in a language that overcomes any sort of language barriers for them. But I do think that, you know, training Montessori educators and finding trained Montessori educators is going to continue to be one of the biggest problems that we face in providing authentic Montessori centers.
So using technology to integrate the training into their lives
Yes.
every moment of the day. Wow.
Yes. Instead of trying to find moments where we could get a head of pedagogy who might be in Cranbourne North over to
Yeah.
Tarneet to train for 5 minutes, we've just made that resource available to everybody at all times and in languages that are most comfortable for them. And we've actually seen, and I know that, you know, it might be a little bit of a faux pas, but we've actually seen circle times occurring where people who are casuals and not necessarily trained as well are now leading because someone's off sick, and they're leading it in an authentic manner because they've got the iPad there next to them and they're watching how you properly do it, and then they do it with the children. So yes, it might not be an ideal solution. You'd love everyone to be Montessori diploma qualified at all times, but this is a solution that's actually workable in the environment that we exist within.
Yeah. Well, if a picture says 1,000 words, a video must say probably 1,000,000, right?
Yeah,
And you know, Maria Montessori was one who pioneered the use of 16 mm film back in the 30s, and encouraged teachers to go and take videos of things that experiences that children couldn't get to in person. So it makes sense that she would probably advocate for the use of video as well.
I think Maria, and I think this is something that, you know, I think sometimes we can get stuck with what's comfortable, but I think Maria was someone who was never comfortable and she never wanted anyone to be comfortable. And I think the more that we push and the more that we say, well, what's the status quo? Where can we push beyond that? That's what she'd want us to do. I think if she saw us sitting really firmly with something she built 150 years ago, she'd be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You need to see how you can make this better. You need to see how you can advance this because that's what I did. And I think if we can do that, then we're actually being true Montessorians.
It's always an experiment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're all scientists. So, what do you see as the biggest challenges faced by the early education sector in Australia in general?
Yeah. I actually am increasingly concerned that we are completely losing the ability to manage challenging behaviors in classrooms. I think since the pandemic, we have definitely seen a steady rise in behavioral challenges, whether that's, you know, prolonged periods of isolation that they had during COVID or developmental delays or, you know, these sort of more hands-off parenting styles. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but we have seen an escalation of difficult and challenging behaviors in the classroom. And I do think that that's actually managing those behaviors is the single greatest obstacle for us in running an intentional, calm Montessori environment, because I think that educators are scared and they're becoming more and more hesitant to intervene. I think they're really fearful of doing or saying the wrong thing in an environment of where the definition of what's wrong is rapidly expanding without necessarily clear guidance. Um, you know, I think I'm trying to say this in a way because I want to be absolutely clear. Like, child safety is and always will be our absolute priority, our number one priority. We've always said, as a family, if we can't provide safe spaces for children, we don't want to be in this business. You know, and I think the introduction of more robust child safe standards and enhanced reporting mechanisms through CCYP are really important, necessary reforms that have rightfully sought to eliminate abuse and unacceptable practices. But my concern is not with the principles, it's with their interpretation and the sort of unintended paralysis that I feel has followed. So just as an example, because this is something we've seen in a few of our centers, educators are scared. If a child is having an absolute meltdown, they're scared to intervene because they don't want to be pulled through child CCYP. They don't want, you know, they don't want to do the wrong thing, and they're not, I don't think there's very good clarity on what the wrong thing is. as an example, I was reading the ASEQA fact sheet on inappropriate discipline, and it rightfully identifies things that are unacceptable, like hitting or belittling a child. But it goes on and says that unacceptable discipline is also the use of negative language like no, stop, don't. It actually says you shouldn't be saying those things. So I think it's reasonable in theory, but in practice, when you've got, possibly 33 children in one room, and you've got a child who's just broken an educator's nose, which is what we've had, who is throwing things, biting other children, it's quite difficult in that situation to see how you wouldn't use words like stop and no and don't. So I think that is something that we really need a little bit more guidance, I think, from the authorities on how we are supposed to manage those, because I think we get principles like we do this and we do that, but they don't necessarily dive into what happens when that doesn't work. Okay, so we sit with a child and we say, how are you feeling? Why is this happening? But when they then hit you in the face, what do you do next? Or when they run off, what do you do next? And I think that's something we've really invested into. We've worked with Sylvia to try and put together a response guide. So if someone bites you or bites a child, here are the exact steps that you take that, as it escalates, what do you do? But, that's our interpretation of what we can do and how we can set those guidelines and frameworks for the children. I think it would be really helpful if the authorities and the regulatory body could actually give us something similar to that they're happy with, to try and relieve some of that paralysis that educators do feel. I feel like if we don't address this, we're going to continue to have educators leave because they don't feel safe. Educators leave because they don't know how to handle these behaviors. But we're also going to have children that aren't set up for success for the future because they're going to go to school and they're going to throw something, or they're not going to be allowed to go inside, outside as much as they like. And then they're going to be told no. And then you're going to have primary and secondary school teachers continue to leave because behaviors are all over the place. So I just don't necessarily think we're setting our children up for success and our educators up for success in that regard at the moment.
It's interesting that Dr. Catherine Reed Holmes gave a presentation at our early childhood conference on the Gold Coast last month, and it was entitled Risk. And she was talking about a very similar thing that you're mentioning, that the regulations and the duty of care can get to the point where it's a bit of a ball and chain.
Mm.
And that she was talking about how safety is important, absolutely, no question, but risk is also important. And children learn by taking risks. For example, climbing trees. If children are not allowed to climb trees, then they never learn the balance that's required to climb higher. So, yeah,
I absolutely agree. And I think that, the same principles apply. If children don't learn boundaries, if they don't learn that you can't do whatever you like at all times, how can they be successful? Society is nothing if not a collection of rules and norms that people need to adhere to. And if we are saying to children in the most formative years of their life, you can hit, you can kick, you can run, you can go inside, outside, you can do whatever you like at all times, why are we surprised when they go to primary school and then they are misbehaving and there are challenges in primary school? Of course there's challenges there because we've set them up incorrectly when they're younger in their most formative years. So I definitely think that there's a way that we could be managing behaviors. I don't think we should ever hit, we should never belittle, there's absolutely positive and constructive ways that you can do that, freedom within boundaries. But I think that educators and even providers could do with more guidance from regulatory authorities about when things escalate, because it's fine having a standard when things are going okay, but when things escalate and that hasn't worked, what do you want us to do? What's the next step that is acceptable, and to run more training on that?
are you seeing a general deterioration in children's behavior in the time that you've been at Amiga?
I think it's been not necessarily since I've started till now, but definitely before COVID. And now I think from the last 10 years, behaviors have been getting worse, and our ability to, it's sort of like behaviors are getting worse in this way, and our ability to constrain those behaviors has been going backwards. Um, I mean, I don't know if you saw,
Sure. Mm.
I'm not sure if you saw, there was recently in the Herald Sun, and I think that came off the back of some comments by a Sequa, that we are now being encouraged to ask for consent every time we change nappy, every time we have any physical contact. And whilst I absolutely think consent is so imperative, if you have, we've got children from, a couple of months old. If I've got a 6-month baby and I want to change their nappy, absolutely I can say to them, I'm going to change your nap, but how do I get that consent? Or what do I do when a child says, no, you're not going to change my nappy? Do I leave that child in a soiled nappy? What do I do? I think sometimes these principles are from a high level, not necessarily on the floor place.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's really dangerous because the people who are on the floor have to implement these things, and then they are either in trouble because they've left someone in a soiled nappy, which is unacceptable, or they haven't sought consent. We got breached the other day. We got a breach in writing to me that said there was a crying toddler and your educator picked them up and cuddled them without asking for consent. I had a breach in writing for that. And my response is that toddler comes to our center 5 days a week for 12 hours a day. That is their primary carer when they are in that classroom. That person sees them more than their own parents. Do they have to ask consent every single time that they are going to pick up that child? What if the child is unable to express in that moment what they need? Do I just leave them? It's very challenging, and I think that's something that is going to be a problem for educators moving forward unless we get better guidance in terms of what's required of us.
So understandably, the authorities are motivated by the desire to protect children from abuse. And, we've seen on the TV, Four Corners, um, instances where children are being abused in early childhood centers. Do you have any advice for educational decision makers and authorities about how to navigate this tricky question of walking that line between not enough and too much regulation?
I don't. I don't know right now how to find that balance. I think that that's something that time will provide when things don't work, or when more advice is needed because things aren't working. Um, as an education provider, what I could say is make sure your teams are trained. Make sure they understand what is not acceptable. And you can only do that with what you have available at that time. So for example, if you've got the ASEQA fact sheet that says don't do these things, train your teams to know don't do these things. On child safe standards, we have significant training. We've got online modules they have to do. We've got area managers that visit once a week that ask them, what are the child safe standards? If something happens, who do you report to? What are the types of abuse? So just a lot of training, a lot of checking, and then just take something seriously, because I think a few of these centers that have been in Four Corners have not necessarily taken and responded appropriately from what I can see. And again, what clickbait is online, I don't know, and I don't know those particular instances, so it's not fair for me to comment. But for us, if I get told of anything, or if my centers get told of anything, we immediately and rigorously investigate that. It doesn't matter if it then doesn't end up being true, or it ends up not meeting certain criteria. If you set that culture where people know what they need to do, and they know that you're going to do something about it, if they do follow what you've asked them to do, that's all that you can ask for. Yeah.
So what you're talking about really is educators on the floor being able to think for themselves, think creatively, knowing the requirements and the regulations, but also being able to make decisions that are appropriate in the situations. Do you have any advice for Well, let me ask you that. What do you think are some desirable skills and talents that are required to be an educational leader or an educator on the floor?
I think you have to have emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, while sort of recognizing and interpreting how other people are feeling. Um, because I think without that, you can't ever build a place of psychological safety, which I think is really important. You need to be able to have those trusting relationships between you and your families, and you and your children, and you and your staff, which only comes if they know you're not going to that you're gonna react appropriately, and that you're gonna listen and show empathy for them. So you're gonna show empathy when they're struggling, and you're gonna motivate them rather than try and control them. So I suppose that sounds a bit fluffy, but as an example, if you get a parent concern in a really confrontational manner, you don't react defensively. You go, okay, I'm going to think, I'm going to respond with reassurance, and then I'm going to action whatever needs to be actioned. So I suppose the ability to just pause your own emotions, understand them, take time to understand where the next person is coming from, and then work through that kind of calmly. It's very hard. I think we all have a tendency to get quite defensive. So I think that emotional intelligence is really important. I've always thought that leadership lives or dies with communication. It's not how well you speak, but it's more about how well you listen. And then if you are able to really understand what that person wants or needs, and then be very clear with what you want, your needs, your expectations. So for example, you could send out a weekly update to staff that has a good balance between operational reminders, these are the expectations, but also then motivates them, calls out highlights, great practices, how they're all meeting their kind of collective mission. So I think communication essential. I think accountability for all your teams. So if you've set expectations, making sure that those are either met or people are actively working on them, so they know they'll be accountable. But I think more importantly, that your teams know you hold yourself accountable. So there's many a time where I've made a mistake, and instead of trying to sort of hide that mistake or blame it on someone else, I think it's really important that leaders go, I made a mistake, acknowledge it, and sort of work on how that won't happen again. So I think that sort of self accountability is really important. And maybe the last is just the ability to inspire. So really mentoring people, coaching people, recognizing their growth, and inspiring them to sort of walk with you on the journey that you want to go down.
Mm. Sounds really really good advice for new and inexperienced center leaders. You I know you do a lot of things outside of your role at Amiga as well. You have a lot going on in your life. How do you manage that work-life balance?
I'm very organized with my time. um, no, I think in all seriousness, I think if you love what you do, there isn't a great distinction between work and play, that balance. So you're right. At the moment, I'm on the board of Australian Childcare Alliance Victoria, which is the sort of Victorian arm of Australia's peak childcare body.
Mhm.
Also the CEO of Amiga, and I'm also an officer cadet in the Australian Army. So you're right, there's quite a lot going on. But I think each of those things really relates to topics that I truly and profoundly care about. So whether it's the health, well-being, success of our children, the happiness of our teams, or the safety of Australia and its people, I don't really necessarily feel the stress of all those kind of competing things. I sort of think it's a privilege to be part of those decisions and projects that will, have an impact on the people, and the topics that I really care about.
Do you have hobbies outside your work, building a world-class early education company?
I've got a pretty full schedule, but I am a little bit boring. Like I really love movies. I really love my family. Um, so I'm always watching the newest films and TV series. I watched the latest Mission Impossible on the weekend. That was fantastic. Anyone who likes Mission Impossible, I would suggest. But I also really love my family. So as I mentioned, my grandmother's got Alzheimer's, so it's really nice. We get to, take her on walks and yeah, just spend that time with my family. So we all like food, so we eat a lot all the time. That's good.
Are you seeing steady demand for Montessori early education where you are? And if so, what do you think draws parents to Montessori for
Yeah.
early childhood?
Yeah, I think that our centers tend to be in high growth areas, where the population does have like quite a high degree of immigrants from parts of Asia and Europe. Um, So those people tend to already have quite a high awareness of the Montessori pedagogy because it's quite popular in those countries. Um, so with our centers, yes, there is a really steady demand. Um, and I think in centers, we have a few centers that aren't necessarily within those socio geographic um, uh, uh, metrics, sorry. So when we do have those and people aren't as already innately familiar with Montessori, it does take a little bit longer to grow. But what I've sort of seen is, okay, parents are like, what's this Montessori? They'll come to us, then they'll see their children really understanding a lot of concepts. They will go and clean their plates at home. They'll push their chairs in. They'll do all these little Montessori things, but then they'll also have this learning and they'll speak to their parents. So then that goes home with the children to the parents. But also then those children will complete their schooling with us and they'll go to primary school, and that primary school will go, oh my gosh, this child is really advanced in this way, or their behavior is really fantastic. And then that school will speak to parents and recommend us. And we've sort of seen that steadily build over years. I'm not certainly not suggesting that's a couple of week process, but over years, they become more familiar with what is Montessori, and what are the benefits, because they see their children coming home with the benefits every night. And then schools see the benefits when the children go to the schools. So yeah, as I said, most of our parents are already aware, but when they're not, they become familiar over time. And then yes, that demand is there for Montessori.
So is there anything about Montessori and how it's portrayed or marketed that you think turns parents off?
Yeah. I think it's probably more that it's not marketed, honestly. We've worked with quite a few consultants in our time who have then had to spend a lot of time getting to know what's Montessori, like what do you actually do? And then once that ice is broken with us, they've gone, I just want to tell you, I actually thought that Montessori was for hippies, or I thought that Montessori was really, 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 really strict, or, these sort of farcical things about what Montessori is, because I don't think is a great awareness of what Montessori actually does encompass. So I don't necessarily think that there's a way that it's marketed incorrectly. I just think that we could probably do better in telling people in the general community, like, what are our core tenets? What do we do? How is that good for the children? How is that good for their future life? And I do think we should keep calling it Montessori. I don't think that there's any shame or any fear that we should have by calling it Montessori. I think we should be really proud of what we do as Montessori centers. I just think we could be better at telling parents and the general community like what that actually means.
Mm. Yeah. It's been said sometimes that using that M word kind of makes it seem like a cult of a person. Like I often wonder why play-based early childhood is so much more popular than Montessori when it's based on Froebel's method, right? And Froebel is 100 years older than Montessori, and she took his method and improved it. She took his gifts and occupations and created those beautiful materials. Um, but we don't associate play-based early childhood education with Froebel, so it doesn't feel backward looking. It feels modern and
Mm.
play-based like that. Don't you think that a new word that doesn't point to one person who died 74 years ago, um, kind of makes us seem a bit old-fashioned or obsolete?
No, I think if we approach Montessori in an old-fashioned and obsolete way, then we'll be perceived as being old-fashioned and obsolete. I think if we are prepared to incorporate technology and we are prepared to modernize in ways that are appropriate, we won't seem backwards. We will seem modern because we are modern, right? Um, I always think it's easier, like if you've got a name associated, it's easier to say, oh, the cult of Montessori. Whereas if you don't have, you've got play base, it's more of a concept as opposed to a person. I think it's easier for people to swallow that as a concept as opposed to some kind of cult. But I do think if we can tell people more about what we do and we can be more open to change and we can be more open to incorporating technology specifically, I think is really important that we need to do that. Then I don't think it's a problem. I just think people are unaware. So I really do think if we could make people more aware about what we're doing and we make sure that we are open ourselves to change, we would be fine.
So Montessori's own casa in Rome was a long daycare.
Mm.
Do you think there's a bit of a stigma around long daycare in Montessori today?
Um, I think there's a fear that it will be diluted. So, things like the 3-hour interrupted work cycle or the mixed age groups, prepared environment, trained Montessori educators. I think, and I think to an extent that fear is probably just that those things will be diluted in a in a long daycare setting. But I don't necessarily know if it's I think the difference is, sorry, and I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I think if you were to run, a 3-hour Montessori session, that would probably be run by people who are like very adamant about Montessori. Whereas in a long daycare setting, you do have providers that go, Montessori is a good differentiator. I'm going to put Billy Bob's Montessori, and I'm not going to do anything to actually be a Montessori. I'm just going to like have complete play based, not train anyone, not do anything to be Montessori based. And I think that's where the stigma comes because people go, oh, look at the long day care center. They're not actually doing Montessori, where it's like, no, that provider is not doing Montessori. And yes, I think that's really problematic because that reflects poorly on all of us. So, for us as an example, we've spent hundreds of thousands training educators. We've got incentives where if you have a diploma or you do our training, you get 3% additional above the award or where you're on in the award. Like we've just got so many incentives and we spent so much like time and financially to be an authentic Montessori that when you have Billy Bob's Montessori down the road and parents go there and they're like, God, this is awful. Montessori is horrendous. Then they won't come to us. I think that is a very real fear that we do have. And I think if we could have some kind of, I mean, I know we don't necessarily have control to say, well, this is an actual Montessori and this is not an actual Montessori. We don't have that ability. But I would love it if we did, because it would be great to say, well, Billy Bob's is just saying they're a Montessori, but Amiga is actually a Montessori. So I think that's where the stigma comes from, not necessarily that long day care is innately problematic. We run a really authentic program within that framework. It's just about providers who want to say they're Montessori, but actually don't want to do the hard yards that you have to put in to be a Montessori.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's behind the Montessori registered program that Montessori Australia has. The challenge, I guess, is getting that out to parents and help parents understand to look for that logo, the Montessori registered logo, so it shows that when there's a quality program being practiced. Um, Munira's been putting a few comments in the chat, but Munira, would you like to ask Max anything or anybody else who's listening? Do you have any questions or comments for Max?
Not really, but I agree with you that if we can differentiate between the proper Montessori and this this is not proper Montessori, that will be great if we can do like that, because Actually, I came from Pakistan, so I can clearly see the difference here and what I have learned there and what I have, like, I worked over there and I'm working here as a trainer in Montessori Academy. So I can see the very clear difference
Mm,
that what we are doing here and what we done there. So yeah, I truly appreciate and I'm agree with you that yes, if we can, but we can't. Yeah, but I love my work and yeah, so yeah, we try to do as the best as we can
mm,
to make it proper Montessori, as we know that it's structured. The Montessori is structured, structured education, like it's education based. It's not normal childcare centers where you just go and play with your toys and this one. It's
mm,
not like that. You need someone who trained proper Montessori and
Mm,
can because it's not easy to know like what material they will use like a toy. They
mm,
don't know, and if educator doesn't know, they always like, if I obviously heard them like saying that my children are getting bored because you don't know
mm,
what next, what after this you can, how you're gonna use this material. If it's, for example, if pink tower, okay, so what else you're gonna do with the pink tower? If the first exercise finish, which you have to put it in the middle, all the cubes in the middle, so that's the first exercise. If children are mastered in that, what's next? So you need to put it in a corner. One unit difference you need to show them. You can do the language, I mean the 3 period lesson for the language. Then you need to play games with that to get the gradation of, okay, this is bigger, this is smaller. Can you give me bigger than this or smaller than this? So all these are, so if you don't know all these things, then obviously your children will get bored of using the same material. Yes, some children they know, but then those who are very, nowadays, what type of children we are getting? The children who are very active.
mm.
So they
mm.
want to know, they want to learn like this. What next? What next? What next? Like that. If
So
you don't
Max,
give them time, that's it. They
Manira,
will, yes, yes.
thank you. Max, I want to ask you, but based on what Manira is talking about, do you think Montessori is just about the materials, or is it more about an attitude, more about
Mm,
the
yes, it's more
relationship?
about that. But yeah.
Yeah, I know. I agree.
Oops.
You're on mute.
Oh, I'm on
Ah.
mute. Am I off mute now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
you.
Okay, cool. But no, I agree. I agree with you, Manira. I think it's more about an attitude. I think it's about, and I really do agree that those extensions, that's where the interest comes from. Sometimes for some children, they want to be pushed further. And I think sometimes the challenge is it's hard to train that. It's hard it's hard to train, like, where can you go next? Because I think it's like a tree. There's so many options about what you could do next with those extensions. So I think it's really hard to train people who don't have qualifications in Montessori and don't necessarily understand how to just use the materials up front initially to then use those extensions. So I do 100% agree with you. I think it's an enduring challenge to kind of keep people trained up, especially in an industry like ours with the attrition levels that we have, which can be quite hard. You sort of train up a bunch of people and then they leave for whatever reason, and then you have to start again, and then it's sort of an ebb and flow that you're always dealing with. So I agree.
Fern, did you have a question?
Uh, Question and comment, I suppose. You said that behavior management is one of the biggest challenges, and as a consultant to parents, I'm finding, well, that is the biggest challenge they're finding in the home environment as well. So I consult to centers and parents on when the behavior goes wrong at school and when the behavior they're struggling with all those early childhood food, and I suppose getting their cooperation around toileting as well is a big thing. So have your educators done positive discipline courses?
Yes, they have. In fact, the conference that was just run in Queensland, we had educators attending that one, which was lovely. They said it was very hands-on. So they have, but again, sort of keeping the training up to date for all educators. When you do have educators that come and go and have different levels of understanding, it's hard to an extent to sort of keep them all up to date at one point. But yes, no, they have, which has been helpful. In terms of families as well, I think the biggest challenge we've found is there's not always a willingness. Yes, exactly.
To do courses.
Exactly. And I think there hasn't necessarily always been a willingness to do things at home. And there has been an increasing view that it's our role. Yeah, it's our role to entirely discipline this child and to teach them what's right and wrong. And then they go home and they can sort of, that doesn't carry on at home, which has been, it has been challenging, because you're sort of, you know, if you've got two, you know, you've got one expectation at home and then there's one expectation at school, it's quite difficult for children to understand what's right and wrong, and they sort of default to what's
one step forward
easiest.
at
Yeah,
school
one
in the
step forward,
classroom,
one
and then
step back.
2 steps back at home.
Exactly, exactly.
Vicky, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, Max, I've been interested to what you've had to say. One of the things Montessori Australia does is has an early years focus group that I've been facilitating, and we actually meet quarterly with Rhonda Livingston from ASEQA, and we present to her feedback from the sector. So there are a few things that you commented earlier that I thought were very interesting, about being told that you needed to have EYLF construction resources. I didn't know there was such a thing, because of course there isn't. And the fact that your sentiment is that you're quite happy just to stay on meeting and stick with an authentic outpouring of your philosophy and your services, and that from an economic business perspective, it's not harming you to do that because your service is full. So these kinds of things, I have a meeting on Wednesday. We have an early years focus group meeting tomorrow. But I have previously expressed to them that there is a declining sentiment across our sector for participation in A&R and for the results of A&R. I myself don't care anymore either, as a provider of 3 services. We're just more interested in getting the staff through that without too much emotional collateral damage, and staying firm with our principles and practices. Now, when I go to ASEQA with this, they're like, oh no, but we've got this many centres getting exceeding, and we've got that, and they just don't hear it. But I'll continue to press that message. The other thing is, if I bring something like the fact that you said that you got a breach in writing for an educator comforting an upset toddler without first asking for consent, I can take that to ASEQA, and they will make the comment that they'll flick it off and go, oh, that's the matter for the state regulators. And so they don't take on any responsibility really. However, they did mention to me that they get together the head representatives from the state, each state, and I'm going to press on Wednesday that we can have a seat annually or at some other time with the state regulators when they get together with the ASEQA, because I think that's an important message. So there has also been feedback from the sector this time that it's taking more than 90 days to get overseas qualifications assessed. And so people are putting in their application, they're starting work, waiting their 90 days, then they have to cease work, just move to a new country, and they have to cease work because their qualification isn't yet assessed, and they're not able to work unless they enroll in a Certificate 3, which is not an appropriate thing to do for our migrants at all. So I'll be raising that as an issue. I don't know if you've experienced that also in Amiga, that particular problem.
Not that I'm aware of, but again, that would be with the recruitment team. They haven't raised it with me as a primary issue. It's disheartening to hear what you said about the fact that you do raise these issues and they don't necessarily get addressed. We are pursuing, obviously there are review options, and we will be pursuing those, because I think some of those breaches are ludicrous, quite frankly. And I think if the law does not require you to run an indoor-outdoor program, you should not be penalized for not doing so.
Well, Max, the supervisory regulations, I don't know if it's the same in Victoria, are horrendous here in Queensland, and my educators are all running scared
Yep.
of missing where a child is or not recognising the child's behind a tree when they've got the rest in, that we are unnecessarily corralling children, which to me is its own problem. Because my trainer said if a child's like this, let them go out, and she had children's moving piles of pavers around the yard from one place to another and back again when they had excess energy. And we're talking 3 to 6 doing that. So even after the sensitive period for maximum effort. But yeah, I'd be really keen if yourself or someone else from Mega, I did meet the lovely Stella and Tagala.
Flat.
Yeah, they were wonderful. I had a great time with them at the positive discipline training. But yeah, if yourself or anyone else from your team would be interested in jumping in that early years focus group, it would be great to have representation from Amiga.
Absolutely, we'd love
just
to.
email me. Yeah,
anything we can do to help, or to try and move this forward, love to. I'll send you an email, Vicky.
Okay, thanks, Max.
Any last comments or questions from anybody?
Yeah, I'd love to touch base with you just on the fact that I do have like a 2-hour online supporting freedom and self-discipline workshop that that does go through strategies and communication strategies and really short things that the educators can learn really quickly in terms of those things with those tantrums and things. That we've used in a lot of centers. Susan's online, and we've done some of those strategies. Like I've gone into the classroom and demonstrated them to the educators so that you're empowering them in those situations where they're running scared for not doing the right thing. Because there are lots of very simple things that are Montessori based that you can do to get the children to encourage cooperation in positive ways, but they take lots of practice and especially around toileting and tantrums and things like that. So yeah, if you're interested, it'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we'll reach out.
Yeah, great.
Well, Max, thank you so much for your time. It's been just such a delight chatting with you, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.